Somewhere between Friends reruns and whatever half-hour comedy is airing this week, something broke. Ratings for new sitcoms have collapsed, laugh tracks have all but vanished, and even the people who built the genre are saying the quiet part out loud. Before we get to who's saying it, here's the strange part. The death of the sitcom wasn't an accident, and it wasn't really about talent either. It was the result of at least 5 separate industry decisions made for completely unrelated reasons that all happened to collide at once. And one of those decisions was made by a man who directed some of the most beloved comedies in television history. A man who now says bluntly that most of what airs today isn't funny. We'll get to exactly what he said in a moment, but first, let's set the scene. The Golden Age, and the warning signs nobody wanted to see. If you grew up on Seinfeld, Frasier, Cheers, or Friends, you probably remember something those shows all had in common. They were loud. Not in volume, but in confidence. A studio audience sat a few feet from the actors, live, and either laughed or didn't. There was nowhere to hide. If a joke didn't land, everyone in the room heard the silence. That format is called multi-camera, or multi-cam, and for decades it was the backbone of American comedy. Several cameras rolling at once, a live audience, a stage built like a theater set. It's the format that gave us Central Perk, the Cheers bar, and the Huxtable living room. Multicam had one brutal, unforgiving requirement. The jokes had to work, in real time, in front of real people. There was no music swelling underneath an awkward pause to make it feel intentional. No slow-motion cutaway to save a scene that wasn't landing. Just the joke, and the room's honest reaction to it. It's a format that some critics have argued essentially demands wit to survive. Take the jokes away, and there's nothing left to hold the show up. So what happened to it? Around the mid-2010s, something shifted. And it's not the reason most people assume. Reason 1. The format quietly died first. Networks began pivoting hard toward single-camera shows. The Office, Parks and Recreation, Modern Family style of comedy. Filmed like a movie. No audience, no laugh track. Executives loved it. It was cinematic. It felt modern. It also happened to be cheaper and faster to produce in some cases. And it opened the door to visual jokes, mockumentary asides, and a totally different rhythm of humor. But here's the twist nobody expected. Getting rid of the audience didn't just change how sitcoms looked. It changed what counted as a joke in the first place. In multicam, a show lives or dies on rapid-fire dialogue, the verbal sparring of Seinfeld, the put-downs in Cheers, the way characters in the Mary Tyler Moore Show would practically finish each other's punchlines. Take away the live audience, and that pressure disappears. A single-camera comedy can get away with a chuckle instead of a guffaws-level laugh, because there's no room to fill with silence. James Burrows, the director behind Cheers, Friends, Will and Grace, and dozens of the most beloved comedies ever made, put it about as directly as anyone in the industry has dared. Asked how sitcoms have evolved over his decades-long career, his answer was blunt. A lot of them aren't funny anymore, because the one prime requirement of a multi-camera sitcom used to be that you'd better be funny. He pins part of that shift on the rise of the single-camera model, which trades big laughs for smaller chuckles, and partly on the streaming model itself, which he says has hurt the actual scriptwriting. That's not a fan on a forum. That's the guy who directed some of the funniest television ever made, saying the format that replaced his own genre doesn't have the same requirement to be funny at all. And if that's true, it raises an uncomfortable question. If being funny is no longer the prime requirement, what replaced it? There's also the small matter of the laugh track itself. That canned, sweetened laughter piped over so many older sitcoms. It started as a radio trick, carried over to television because early filming setups made it hard to capture a live crowd's reaction cleanly, and eventually became something else entirely. A tool for sweetening a joke that didn't quite land in the room, smoothing it over so home viewers never knew the difference. Audiences spent decades quietly resenting it, even as networks kept demanding it, because it worked. It told you when to laugh, whether you wanted to be told or not. When single-camera comedy dropped the laugh track completely, critics treated it as a sign of newfound sophistication comedy, finally trusting its audience to decide for itself what was funny. That's a nice story. But it also removed the one honest scoreboard the genre ever had, and nothing quite replaced it. We'll get to that. But first, there's a second casualty of this shift: that almost nobody talks about, and it might be the most important one. Reason 2. The death of wit. Here's something you've probably felt without being able to name it. Old sitcoms had characters who talked to each other. Real conversational combat insults, callbacks, wordplay, timing. Watch an old clip of Seinfeld and notice something. The characters actually laugh at each other's jokes, sometimes. It's a small detail, but it signals something bigger. These shows were built entirely around verbal wit, the kind of humor that comes from two people trading lines in a room, which happens to be exactly how most people experience humor in their actual lives. That style of humor has been quietly disappearing from television for about 20 years. One media critique put it starkly: witty, character-based dialogue used to be one of the most universal forms of comedy, precisely because everyday conversation is how most people experience humor day to day. But it's fallen through the cracks as the divide between comedy styles has widened. So why does that matter beyond nostalgia? Because there's a genuinely unsettling follow-up question buried in that same critique. If nobody is practicing that kind of quick-witted, dialogue-driven comedy on television anymore, who exactly is the next generation of writers supposed to learn it from? Comedy writing is a craft that's traditionally been passed down by watching and absorbing. And if the shows aren't teaching it anymore, the skill itself may be quietly eroding. That's not a small structural shift. That's a possible extinction event for an entire style of comedy writing, happening in slow motion, largely unnoticed. But formats and writing styles are only part of the story. There's a much colder, much more corporate reason sitcoms feel different now, and it has almost nothing to do with jokes. Reason 3. The money changed, so the writing changed. Picture this. For decades, the entire economic engine of a sitcom was syndication, a show like Seinfeld, running 180 episodes, or Friends, hitting 236, existed specifically so it could be sold into reruns for years afterward. That's the business model that funded big writers' rooms, long seasons, and the ability to workshop a joke for weeks before it ever aired. Streaming blew that model up. Shows now get 8, 10, maybe 12 episodes a season, and instead of syndication, the entire value proposition shifted to subscriber retention. That single change rippled all the way down into how comedy gets written, and one of the most consequential shifts happened somewhere you'd never think to look: the writer's room itself. Here's a number that might surprise you. A traditional television writer's room used to employ around 7 writers or more on a long-term basis, giving them months to break stories, punch up jokes, and watch how scripts played out once they were filmed, adjusting as they went. Streaming introduced something called the mini room, a small group of writers hired to break a season's stories at union minimum pay, on a short-term contract, asked to do dramatically more work in a fraction of the time. One TV historian summed up exactly what's happening in a single line: streamers are effectively producing entire shows for a fraction of the price by compressing what used to be months of collaborative work into weeks. Now stack that against something a showrunner casually mentioned in a recent industry interview. Comedy writers' room jobs have become so scarce that experienced writers have started offering to take lower job titles than they've previously held just to get a seat in the room, with some studios even being offered a pair of writers for the price of one. Think about the incentives that creates. Talented comedy writers, desperate for the few available jobs, working faster for less money, with less time to actually punch up a joke until it's genuinely, reliably funny. Comedy is one of the only genres of writing where you can objectively test whether something works. A joke either gets a laugh or it doesn't. And that testing process takes time. Time is exactly what the modern writer's room doesn't have anymore. That's the money side. But there's a fourth force at work here, and it's arguably the most talked about one online, even though the actual data on it is messier than people assume. Reason 4. Did comedy get too afraid to be funny? You've probably heard this argument before, maybe even made it yourself. Comedy today is too careful, too worried about who might be offended, too focused on saying the safe thing instead of the funny thing. It's a popular theory, and it's not just coming from anonymous internet commenters, it's coming from the people who actually built the genre. Lisa Kudrow Phoebe Buffay herself, star of one of the most iconic multi-camera sitcoms of all time, was asked directly about the current state of sitcoms, and her answer was pointed. She said she isn't drawn to today's multi-camera sitcoms at all, describing them as too afraid to actually say things, and contrasted them with shows like 30 Rock, Seinfeld, and Friends, which, She called genuinely funny and well-written, in a way she thinks modern comedy has lost. Her conclusion wasn't subtle. She said what television comedy needs now is a real return to the actual ability to make jokes. Here's where it gets interesting, though, because playing it safe isn't the whole story, and treating it as the sole villain would be too easy. Risk aversion in comedy isn't really about writers being scared of a punchline. It's a business decision made upstream of the writer's room entirely. When a show costs tens of millions of dollars, gets 8 episodes to prove itself, and lives or dies on an algorithm's willingness to promote it to new subscribers, executives don't want anything that could alienate a single segment of a global audience. That pressure doesn't produce cowardly writers. It produces cautious commissioning. Fewer swings get greenlit in the first place, which means the ones that do get made lean toward the broadly inoffensive rather than the sharply specific. Specificity, ironically, is usually where the biggest laughs live. So is it really about being afraid? Or is it about who's making the decisions and what they're being measured on? That distinction matters, because it points to the fifth and final piece of this puzzle, and it might be the biggest one of all. Reason 5. Nobody's watching the same show anymore. Here's a thought experiment. In 1993, if a sitcom was funny, nearly everyone found out about it within a week, because there were only a handful of channels and everyone was watching the same handful of shows. A hit could dominate a cultural moment. Today, a new sitcom is competing not just against other sitcoms, but against every other streaming platform, every YouTube channel, every TikTok clip, every podcast, an infinite buffet of content fighting for the same 20 minutes of someone's evening. That fragmentation changes what gets made and how it's judged. Streaming platforms have visibly struggled with the multicam sitcom format specifically. One breakdown of recent streaming comedy releases noted that several attempts at reviving the traditional studio audience sitcom barely lasted 10 or 11 days in the platform's own top 10 rankings before disappearing, entirely a stark contrast to shows like Seinfeld, Friends, or Sister, which ran for 6 to 10 full seasons and hundreds of episodes in the old model. The same analysis raised an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe it's not that the multicam sitcom is being made worse. Maybe audiences have simply lost their appetite for the format altogether, or the format itself just doesn't translate to how people watch streaming platforms. That's worth sitting with. It suggests the issue might not be fixable by simply hiring funnier writers or bigger stars. It might be a structural mismatch, a 20th century format trying to survive inside a 21st century distribution system that was never built for it. There's a smaller, stranger detail buried in that same fragmentation story, though. And it's the kind of thing that only becomes visible with hindsight. Streaming platforms release most new shows all at once, every episode dropped in a single day, rather than the old weekly rollout that gave a sitcom time to build word-of-mouth episode by episode. That sounds like a convenience for viewers, but it quietly strips away something sitcoms used to depend on entirely: the Monday morning conversation. Part of what made Seinfeld or Friends a phenomenon wasn't just the writing. It was the fact that an entire country watched the same episode on the same night and talked about it the next day, which pushed the show deeper into the culture with zero additional effort from the network. A same-day full-season drop replaces that shared moment with millions of people watching in isolation, on their own schedule, with nobody around them to react to it. And here's the uncomfortable question that raises. Is it possible some of what we remember as funnier writing wasn't actually funnier at all, it just had a room full of the whole country to laugh in? So, is the sitcom actually dead? Here's where most videos on this topic would tell you the sitcom is dead and end on a sad note. But that's not quite accurate, and it undersells something genuinely interesting happening in the wreckage. Comedy didn't disappear. It migrated. Shows like Abbott Elementary prove that a well-run writer's room, given actual time and stability, can still produce something both funny and beloved on broadcast television, notably one of the few current shows still generating a flood of writers desperate to work on it. The opposite problem most of the industry has. Meanwhile, some of the sharpest character-driven wit critics have pointed to in the last decade came not from a traditional American network sitcom at all, but from smaller, single-camera shows willing to let dialogue breathe and characters actually spar with each other the way Cheers or Seinfeld once did. So the format didn't kill the funny. A collision of 5 separate forces did. The collapse of the multicam pressure test, the quiet erosion of dialogue, driven wit, an economic model that pays comedy writers less to work faster, a genuine but overstated fear of risk, and an audience so fragmented that no single show can dominate a cultural moment the way Friends or Seinfeld once did. Which raises one last question worth thinking about. If all 5 of those forces reversed tomorrow, if a network brought back long writers' rooms, full seasons, live studio audiences, and real creative risk, would audiences even come back? Or has the very idea of appointment television, a joke landing live in a room full of strangers, become something an entire generation has simply never experienced and doesn't know it's missing? That might be the real reason sitcoms aren't funny anymore. Not that the jokes got worse, but that the room they used to live in, loud, unforgiving, and honest, mostly isn't there to test them anymore. Isn't there to test them anymore. Isn't there to test